Admiral Vexithara stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the holographic display with satisfaction. The blue dot in the center represented their next target, a small star system called Sol. The data showed a young species called humans who had barely learned to travel between planets. Their weapons were simple metal projectiles and chemical explosives. Their ships moved slowly using primitive rocket engines. Perfect, Vexithara thought to himself. This would be easier than their last 3 conquests. The Zaperian Empire had ruled over 12 star systems for 3,000 years. They were experts at conquest. Their method was always the same: show overwhelming force, demand surrender, then rule with an iron fist. It worked every time because most species were smart enough to know when they were beaten. Commander Jake Sullivan was having coffee in his quarters aboard the EDS Liberty when the alert came through. Red lights flashed throughout the ship as his communication officer rushed to his room. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from unknown vessels at the edge of the system," Lieutenant Bobby Chen said, his face pale. Jake followed him to the bridge. Captain Lisa Morgan was already there, her dark eyes focused on the main screen. What they saw made everyone go quiet. Hundreds of alien ships hung in space like a dark cloud. Each ship was 3 times larger than their biggest warship. "Put the transmission through," Jake ordered. Admiral Vexithara's image appeared on the screen. He was tall and thin with gray skin and 4 eyes. When he spoke, his voice was cold and emotionless. "Primitive humans of Sol System. I am Admiral Vexithara of the Zaperian Empire. You have 72 hours to surrender all your colonies and submit to our rule. If you refuse, we will destroy every human settlement and take what remains by force. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. The bridge was silent for a long moment. "How many ships do they have?" Jake asked. "Our sensors count 437 vessels, sir," reported Navigation Officer Tim Brooks. "Each one outguns our entire fleet." Lisa Morgan pulled up tactical displays on her console. The numbers were not good. Humanity had 57 combat ships spread across the solar system. The aliens had brought enough firepower to glass every planet twice over. "Send a message to Earth Command," Jake said quietly. "Tell them we have a situation." On Luna Station, Dr. Alex Turner was working late in his laboratory when the emergency broadcast reached him. As head of the xenobiology department, he had been studying alien species for years. But he had never seen anything like the Zaperians. He pulled up every piece of data they had on similar species. The pattern was always the same. The Zaperians would arrive with massive force, demand surrender, and then rule through fear. They had conquered 12 different species using this exact method. Alex reached for his communicator and called his assistant, Dr. Nancy Walsh. "Nancy, drop everything and come to my lab. Bring all the files on aggressive alien psychology. We need to understand what we're dealing with." Within an hour, they had spread hundreds of reports across Alex's desk. Every species the Zaperians had conquered had one thing in common. They had all tried to negotiate. They had all looked for peaceful solutions. They had all failed. "The pattern is clear," Nancy said, pointing to a chart. "They give a short deadline, then attack with overwhelming force. Most species surrender within days." Alex nodded grimly. "But what happens to species that don't surrender?" Nancy pulled up another file. "According to these reports, they glass the major population centers, then hunt down survivors. They don't take prisoners. They don't show mercy." At Earth Defense Command, Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos was having the same realization. She stood in the war room surrounded by monitors showing defensive positions throughout the solar system. General Pete Williams sat at the head of the table, his weathered face showing the strain of command. "Maria, give me options," the general said. Maria pulled up a holographic display of the solar system. Red dots showed Zaperian forces. Blue dots showed human positions. "Sir, in a straight fight we lose. Badly. Their ships are bigger, faster, and better armed. They have us outnumbered 8-1. "So we surrender?" asked Colonel Frank Davis from across the table. Maria's expression hardened. "Not necessarily. I've been studying their tactics. They rely on fear and overwhelming initial force. They expect their enemies to think logically and choose surrender over death. And, General Williams prompted, and humans aren't always logical when we're angry, sir. Security Chief Tony Blake was coordinating evacuation plans when his assistant, Lieutenant Helen Carter, burst into his office. Sir, I've been monitoring Zaperian communications. They're not just planning to conquer us. They're planning to study us. Tony looked up from his papers. What do you mean? They consider humans an interesting species because we're one of the few that developed so many different forms of combat. Most species focus on one type of warfare. We have ground combat, naval combat, air combat, space combat, and dozens of variations within each category. Tony frowned. So they want to learn from us before they wipe us out? It gets worse, sir. They're planning to keep some humans alive as specimens. They want to understand how we became so good at killing each other. Meanwhile, aboard the Zaperian flagship, Admiral Vexathara was reviewing the final invasion plans. His second-in-command, Commander Zixara, stood beside him. Admiral, the humans have not responded to our demand, Zixara reported. Expected, Vexathara replied. They need time to accept their fate. Most species use the full 72 hours to prepare their surrender. What if they choose to fight? Vexathara's four eyes focused on the display showing Earth. Then we will provide them with a demonstration of why resistance is futile. A few destroyed cities should convince them to be reasonable. Neither of them realized that humans had spent the last 24 hours not preparing surrender documents, but doing something else entirely. In shipyards across the solar system, civilian vessels were being rapidly converted into warships. Mining explosives were being loaded onto freighters. Scientists were working around the clock to weaponize technologies that had been designed for peaceful purposes. Most importantly, humanity was doing something the Zaperians had never encountered in their 3,000 years of conquest. They were getting excited about the prospect of a fight. Commander Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Liberty, watching reports come in from across the system. Every human colony was reporting the same thing. Volunteers were flooding military recruitment centers, not to evacuate, but to fight. Sir, Captain Lisa Morgan said, a strange smile on her face. I think the Zaperians may have made a mistake. How so? They've given us 72 hours to prepare. Every other species used that time to plan their surrender. We're using it to plan their funeral. The 72 hours ended at exactly 0800 Earth Standard Time. Admiral Vexathara had expected to receive humanity's surrender by now. Instead, his communications officer reported complete silence from the human fleet. No surrender message, Admiral, Commander Zixara reported. Should we proceed with the demonstration attack? Vexathara nodded. Target their largest military installation. A few thousand dead should convince the rest to be reasonable. The Zaperian fleet moved into the solar system with perfect formation. Their ships advanced in neat rows, weapons charged and ready. This was how they had conquered 12 star systems. Show overwhelming force, destroy one target, then accept surrender. But something was wrong. The human fleet was not where it was supposed to be. Where are their ships? Vexathara demanded. His tactical officer, Sub-Commander Nixoth, stared at his displays in confusion. Admiral, our sensors show no human vessels at the expected defensive positions. They appear to have scattered. In 3,000 years of conquest, Vexathara had never seen a defending fleet scatter. Every other species had formed defensive lines or grouped around their most important planets. This was basic military strategy. Commander Jake Sullivan watched the alien fleet from his position behind Jupiter's largest moon. His ship, the Liberty, was running silent alongside 30 other vessels. They had covered their hulls with asteroid rock and shut down all non-essential systems. To enemy sensors, they looked like space debris. They're moving exactly as predicted, Captain Lisa Morgan whispered, studying her tactical display. Single formation, no scouts, no rear guard. Jake smiled grimly. The Zaperians fought like a species that had never faced real resistance. Their formations were designed to look impressive, not to be effective against an enemy that actually fought back. Signal the other groups, Jake ordered. Execute alpha pattern in 30 seconds. Across the solar system, human ships received the same order. They had spent 3 days studying Zaperian tactics from old battle records. The aliens always used the same strategy: massive frontal assault with overwhelming firepower. The humans had decided to try something different. Lieutenant, Commander Steve Parker commanded a squadron of modified mining ships hiding in the asteroid belt. His vessels were not warships. They were freight haulers and ore processors that had been hastily armed with mining lasers and loaded with industrial explosives. Remember, he told his crews over the comm, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to make them wish they had stayed home. The first human attack came from 6 different directions at once. Ships that had been hiding behind moons and asteroids suddenly emerged, moving in patterns that made no sense to Zaperian tacticians. Captain Lisa Morgan's squadron hit the alien formation from below, using the gravity well of Mars to accelerate their ships to impossible speeds. Her modified destroyers struck like bullets, firing everything they had before disappearing back into the planet's shadow. At the same time, Steve Parker's mining ships attacked from the asteroid belt. They did not try to fight ship-to-ship battles. Instead, they used their industrial equipment to throw massive chunks of rock at the alien fleet. Asteroids moving at high speed became weapons that could crack starship hulls. The Zaperians tried to respond, but they had never fought an enemy that refused to stay in one place. Their weapons were designed for long-range combat between stationary fleets. The humans kept moving, attacking, and disappearing before the aliens could return fire. Dr. Alex Turner was monitoring the battle from Luna Station when he noticed something interesting. The alien ships were not adapting their tactics. Even after an hour of combat, they were still trying to form the same neat battle lines that had worked against every other species. Fascinating, he said to his assistant Nancy Walsh. They literally do not know how to change their strategy during a fight. Nancy pulled up the psychological profiles they had compiled. According to our analysis, the Zaperians have never needed to adapt. Every other species they fought used conventional tactics, which means they have no experience with improvisation, Alex realized. They are following a script, and we are not reading from the same book. The battle continued for 6 hours. The Zaperians had superior firepower, but the humans had superior flexibility. Every time the aliens tried to form a battle line, human ships would attack from unexpected angles. When the aliens tried to pursue, they found themselves chasing shadows. Security Chief Tony Blake was leading a boarding operation on a damaged Zaperian cruiser when he made an important discovery. His team had fought their way through the ship's corridors expecting fierce resistance. Instead, they found alien crew members who seemed completely unprepared for close combat. These guys have never been boarded before, Sergeant Kate Williams reported over the comm. They do not know how to fight inside their own ships. Tony nodded as he examined alien weapon designs. Everything was built for long-range combat. The Zaperians had no experience with the kind of close-quarters fighting that humans had been perfecting for thousands of years. Boys, Tony announced to his boarding teams, I think we just found our new favorite tactic. By the end of the first day, Admiral Vexithara faced a situation that had never occurred in Zaperian military history. His fleet had engaged an enemy for 6 hours and had nothing to show for it except damaged ships and confused reports from his commanders. Admiral, Commander Zixara said hesitantly, perhaps we should withdraw and reassess. Vexithara's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display. The human ships were still out there, still moving in those impossible patterns, still refusing to fight a proper battle. No, he said firmly. We will not be defeated by primitive aliens who do not even understand basic military strategy. What Vexithara did not understand was that the humans understood military strategy perfectly. They simply understood that following the rules only mattered if your enemy was also following the same rules. The Zaperians were playing chess while the humans had brought a deck of cards, a pair of dice, and a Monopoly board. Commander Jake Sullivan received damage reports from across his scattered fleet. They had lost 3 ships and taken minor damage on a dozen others. In return, they had disabled or destroyed 15 Zaperian vessels and completely disrupted the alien formation. Sir, Captain Lisa Morgan reported, Enemy forces are trying to regroup near Jupiter. Jake studied the tactical display. The aliens were still thinking in terms of formation fighting and overwhelming firepower. They were trying to gather their scattered forces into one massive fleet again. Signal all units, Jake ordered. Time for Phase 2. Let us show them what happens when humans stop being polite. Admiral Vexithera stared at the casualty reports in disbelief. After 1 week of fighting, his fleet had lost 43 ships, while the humans had lost only 12. This was impossible. The Zaperian Empire had never suffered such losses against a primitive species. Send a message to High Command, he ordered Commander Zixara. Request immediate reinforcements and authorization to deploy terror weapons. The response came within hours. High Command was sending 200 additional ships and the feared punishment division. More importantly, they were lifting all restrictions on civilian targets. If these humans want to fight, the message read, we will give them a war they will never forget. Engineer Carol Davis was working in her laboratory on Europa when the first civilian colony was attacked. She watched the news feeds with growing horror as Zaperian ships bombarded the mining station on Ceres. The aliens were not targeting military installations. They were killing innocent people. The attack lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 12,000 civilians were dead. Men, women, and children who had never held a weapon in their lives. Carol sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the dark screen. Then she opened her computer files and began working on projects she had never intended to build. Theoretical weapons that existed only in mathematics suddenly became very real priorities. Computer, she said quietly. Open Project Gravitational Lance. Authorization Davis 77 Alpha. Her assistant, physicist Dan Roberts, found her still working 18 hours later. Papers covered every surface of the lab, filled with calculations and design sketches. Carol, you need to sleep, Dan said gently. She looked up at him with tired eyes. Dan, how long would it take to build a gravity manipulation device? For what purpose? To turn their ships inside out. Dan studied the calculations spread across her desk. The mathematics were sound, but the power requirements were enormous. This would require the entire output of a fusion reactor. Then we build bigger reactors, Carol said simply. They want to kill civilians. Let us show them what happens when engineers get angry. Major Sam Parker received word about the Ceres attack while his unit was preparing for another boarding operation. His hometown colony had been among the targets. His sister had been visiting there with her family. Sam read the casualty list 3 times before the names sank in. His sister Jenny, her husband Mike, their 2 children ages 6 and 8. Sergeant Kate Williams found him sitting alone in the armory, staring at a picture of his niece and nephew. Major? She said softly. Sam looked up at her. His face was calm, but something cold had settled in his eyes. Kate, gather the squad. We need to have a conversation about new tactics. Within an hour, Sam had assembled his best fighters in the briefing room. These were veterans of a dozen boarding actions, soldiers who had learned to fight the Zaperians in the close confines of starship corridors. The aliens have decided to target civilians, Sam began. They think this will break our morale and force us to surrender. Private Joe Miller raised his hand. Major, what are our new orders? Sam smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Our orders are to make sure they regret that decision. From now on, we are not just boarding their ships to disable them. We are boarding their ships to send a message. What kind of message? Sir? Asked Corporal Linda Shaw. The kind that makes the survivors wake up screaming. Dr. Alex Turner was analyzing Zaperian biology when the reports of the civilian attacks reached him. He had been studying alien tissue samples and genetic data, trying to understand their physiology for medical purposes. Now he was studying the same data for very different reasons. Nancy, he called to his assistant, bring me everything we have on Zaperian respiratory systems. Dr. Nancy Walsh looked confused. Alex, why do you need their breathing data? Because, Alex said quietly, I want to know what kinds of gases are toxic to them. Nancy stared at him in shock. Alex, you are talking about biological weapons. No, Alex corrected. I am talking about species-specific atmospheric modifications. There is a difference. Is there? Alex pulled up images of the destroyed colony on series. 12,000 civilians, Nancy. They killed children to make a point, so now we are going to make a point of our own. Communications specialist Ben Clark was monitoring Zaperian transmissions when he discovered something interesting. The alien crews were becoming increasingly disturbed by human tactics. Their military reports contained references to impossible combat behavior and psychologically disturbing enemy actions. He shared his findings with analyst Amy Foster, who had been studying alien psychology. They are scared, Amy realized. Look at these intercepts. They keep referring to humans as the laughing death and the species that enjoys pain. Ben nodded. Apparently our boarding teams have been making quite an impression. What do you mean? According to these reports, our soldiers sing while they fight. They make jokes during combat. One report describes a human who was shot 3 times and kept fighting while telling jokes to his squad mates. Amy pulled up more intercepts. This is fascinating. The Zaperians have never encountered a species that treats warfare as entertainment. They are used to enemies who fear death, not enemies who laugh at it. Maybe we should encourage this, Ben suggested. If our reputation is scaring them, we should make sure that reputation spreads. Within days, human broadcasts began reaching Zaperian ships throughout the system. The transmissions contained human music, comedy shows, and action movies. But they also contained recordings from the battlefields, showing human soldiers fighting, with apparent joy and making jokes in the middle of firefights. The psychological effect on Zaperian crews was immediate and devastating. These aliens had spent their entire military careers fighting species that behaved predictably. They understood enemies who fought for survival, for territory, or for resources. They did not understand enemies who fought because they enjoyed fighting. Engineer Carol Davis completed her first gravity weapon after 2 weeks of non-stop work. The device was the size of a shipping container and required 3 fusion reactors to power it. When she tested it on a captured Zaperian fighter, the results exceeded her expectations. The alien ship folded in on itself like crumpled paper. Dan, she said to her assistant, we need to build more of these, many more. Physicist Dan Roberts was working on his own project, weapons that violated the normal rules of space and time. His breakthrough came when he realized that faster-than-light communication technology could be weaponized. If we can send messages faster than light, he explained to Carol, we can send explosions faster than light. What does that mean? It means we can hit their ships before we fire the weapon. Major Sam Parker's new tactics were having their intended effect. Zaperian crews had begun abandoning their ships rather than face human boarding parties. The aliens were spreading stories about humans who could not be killed, who laughed when wounded, and who treated combat like a game. Sir, Sergeant Kate Williams reported after their latest mission. The aliens are starting to surrender when they see us coming. Sam nodded with satisfaction. Good. Fear is a weapon, and we are very good at using weapons. The war had been going on for 6 months, when Admiral Vexathera finally understood what his species was facing. The humans were not just defending their territory, they were enjoying the process of destroying his fleet. Every day brought new horrors, human weapons that bent the laws of physics, human soldiers who fought like demons and laughed like children, human engineers who turned peaceful technologies into instruments of destruction with frightening creativity. For the first time in 3,000 years of conquest, Vexathera began to wonder if the Zaperian Empire had chosen the wrong enemy. 6 months after the war began, human ships appeared in Zaperian space for the first time. The roles had completely reversed. Now the aliens were defending their homes while humans brought the fight to them. Admiral Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the EDS Vengeance. The ship had been built during the war using technologies that had not existed when the fighting started. Its hull was covered in armor that could bend light around it, making it nearly invisible. Its weapons could fire projectiles that arrived at their target before they were launched. Signal from the advanced scouts, Admiral, reported Captain Lisa Morgan. She now wore the insignia of a full commander, promoted after leading 30 successful deep strike missions into enemy territory. What do they report? The Zaperian home system has 4 inhabited planets and 200 defensive platforms. Their fleet strength is down to 300 ships, but they are all concentrated around their capital world. Jake nodded. The Zaperians were finally learning to adapt, but it was too late. Human forces had evolved far beyond what they had been at the start of the war. Deploy the new weapons, Jake ordered. Let us show them what 6 months of human innovation looks like. Engineer Carol Davis watched from the science station as her gravity weapons were loaded onto the attack ships. What had started as a single prototype had become a production line. Her devices could now fold space itself, creating pockets of crushing gravity that turned enemy ships into compressed metal cubes. Her latest creation was even more terrifying. She called it the reality anchor, and it could lock a section of space into a specific configuration. Enemy ships caught in its field could not move, could not fire, and could not even change their internal air pressure. Carol, said her assistant, Dan Roberts, I sometimes worry that we have become too good at this. Carol looked at him with eyes that had grown cold over the months of war. Dan, they killed children to make a point. Now we are making a point of our own. Dan nodded and returned to his own work. His faster-than-light weapons had evolved into something that scared even him. His newest device could fire projectiles backward through time, hitting enemy ships, several seconds before the weapon was actually fired. The mathematics hurt his brain, but the results were undeniable. Enemy ships would explode, and then a few seconds later, human ships would fire the shots that had destroyed them. On the planet, Zephyr Prime High Command was in emergency session. Grand Admiral Kixathara, Supreme Commander of all Zaperian forces, reviewed the latest battle reports with growing horror. Explain to me, he said to his intelligence chief, how a primitive species has managed to drive our forces back to our home system. Intelligence Commander Noxara consulted his files with trembling hands. Grand Admiral, the humans have evolved. Their technology now exceeds ours in several categories. Their weapons violate multiple laws of physics. Their soldiers display combat behavior that our psychologists classify as impossible. Impossible how? They appear to enjoy warfare, sir. Not just victory, but the actual process of combat. They laugh during firefights. They make jokes while their ships are being destroyed. They volunteer for suicide missions and seem happy about it. Grand Admiral Kixathara struggled to understand this concept. In 3,000 years of expansion, the Zaperian Empire had never encountered a species that treated war as entertainment. What about their weapons? Sir, they have developed gravity manipulation, time distortion, and reality modification devices. Their latest ships can become invisible, teleport short distances, and fire weapons that ignore our shields completely. The Grand Admiral stared at the tactical displays showing human forces throughout Zaperian space. How is this possible? 6 months ago, they had chemical rockets and metal projectiles. According to our analysis, humans have an unusual ability to innovate rapidly under pressure. The more we threaten them, the more creative they become. War seems to stimulate their technological development. Major Sam Parker led his special operations team through the corridors of a Zaperian space station. His soldiers moved with the confidence of veterans who had never lost a battle. They no longer needed to board enemy ships by force. Most Zaperian crews surrendered as soon as they realized humans were coming. Room clear, reported Sergeant Kate Williams as she checked another section of the station. Same here, added Corporal Rick Stone from the other direction. Sam looked around at the abandoned command center. The alien crew had fled so quickly they had left their dinner still warm on the tables. Sir, Kate asked, what do we do with stations like this? The aliens are not even trying to fight anymore. Sam considered the question. It was true that Zaperian resistance had collapsed in many sectors. Enemy forces would retreat as soon as human ships appeared, often abandoning perfectly good military installations. We use them as forward bases, Sam decided, and we leave messages for the next Zaperian forces that arrive. What kind of messages? Sam smiled. The kind that explain what happens to species that attack human civilians. Communications specialist, Ben Clark was broadcasting human culture throughout Zaperian space when he made an interesting discovery. The aliens were trying to understand human psychology by studying human entertainment. Amy, he called to analyst Amy Foster, you need to see this. Amy came over to his station and looked at the intercepts he had decoded. What am I looking at? Zaperian intelligence reports about human movies and music. They are trying to figure out how our minds work by analyzing our art. Amy read through the alien analysis with growing amusement. They think our action movies, our documentary footage? It gets better. They have concluded that all humans are trained warriors because our entertainment contains so much violence. They believe we are a species that has been preparing for galactic war for centuries. That is ridiculous. Is it? Ben asked. Look at how we fight. Look at what we have accomplished in 6 months. Maybe they are not completely wrong. Dr. Alex Turner completed his biological weapons program by creating the most humane method of warfare ever developed. His atmospheric modifiers could make enemy ships uninhabitable without actually killing the crews. The beauty of it, he explained to Dr. Nancy Walsh, is that it forces them to surrender without causing permanent harm. Nancy looked at the test results. The modified atmosphere would cause Zaperian crews to become drowsy and confused, but it would not hurt them permanently. Alex, this is actually kind of merciful. That is the point. We want them to surrender, not die. Dead enemies cannot spread stories about human capabilities. The psychological warfare campaign was working better than anyone had expected. Reports from throughout Zaperian space described enemy forces fleeing at the first sign of human ships. Some alien commanders were requesting transfers to other sectors rather than face human forces. Admiral Jake Sullivan received a priority transmission from Earth while his fleet was approaching the Zaperian capital system. The message was from the President herself. Admiral Sullivan, the President said, the Zaperian government has requested a meeting to discuss terms. They want to negotiate an end to hostilities. Jake looked at the tactical display showing Zaperian defensive positions around their home world. The aliens had pulled back all their remaining forces to protect their most important planet. Ma'am, Jake replied, should we agree to negotiations? That depends, Admiral. In your professional opinion, have we made our point? Jake considered the question. Human forces now controlled 12 star systems that had once belonged to the Zaperian Empire. Enemy resistance had collapsed across multiple sectors. Most importantly, the galaxy was watching everything that happened. Yes, ma'am, Jake said finally. I believe we have made our point very clearly. Then prepare for peace talks, Admiral. But keep your weapons ready. If they are not sincere about surrender, we will finish what they started. Captain Lisa Morgan looked at the sensor readings from the Zaperian home system. Admiral, they have every ship they have left concentrated around their capital. If they wanted to keep fighting, this would be their last stand. Jake nodded. The aliens had learned too late that humans were not like other species. When threatened with extinction, humans did not surrender. They innovated, adapted, and became more dangerous than their enemies had ever imagined possible. The war was almost over, but the galaxy would remember what happened when someone made the mistake of truly angering humanity. The surrender ceremony took place aboard the EDS Retribution, a ship that had been built entirely during the 18-month war. Its technology was so advanced that Zaperian scientists could not understand how it worked. The hull seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, and its weapons could apparently fire through solid matter. Admiral Jake Sullivan stood in the main conference room, watching as Grand Admiral Kik Cythera signed the formal surrender documents. The alien's 4 hands shook as he wrote his name on papers that would end the Zaperian Empire's 3,000-year expansion. The terms are simple, Jake explained to the assembled alien commanders. You will return all territory taken from other species. You will pay reparations to the families of those you killed, and you will never again attack any human settlement. Grand Admiral Kik Cythera looked up from the documents. What happens if we refuse these terms? Captain Lisa Morgan, now bearing the rank of Admiral, answered before Jake could speak. Then we continue the war until there are no Zaperians left to refuse anything. The alien commander's 4 eyes widened in fear. He had seen the reports of what human forces had done to his empire. Entire star systems had been cleared of Zaperian presence in a matter of weeks. Their military had been systematically destroyed by enemies who seemed to treat warfare as a form of art. "We accept," Kixathera said quietly. Dr. Alex Turner watched the ceremony from the science station. His biological weapons had proven so effective that most Zaperian crews now surrendered rather than risk exposure to human atmospheric modifiers. He had created something unprecedented in galactic warfare, weapons that forced surrender without causing death. "Alex," his assistant Dr. Nancy Walsh whispered, "do you think we went too far?" Alex considered the question as he watched the alien commanders sign away their empire. "Nancy, they started this war by threatening to exterminate our entire species. We ended it by making them too afraid to continue fighting. I think we showed remarkable restraint. It was true. Human forces could have wiped out the Zaperian species entirely. The weapons developed by engineers like Carol Davis could have turned their planets into lifeless rocks. Instead, humans had chosen to break their enemies' will to fight rather than their ability to exist." Engineer Carol Davis stood beside physicist Dan Roberts as they observed the surrender. Her gravity weapons had become so advanced that they could selectively crush individual components of enemy ships while leaving the crew compartments intact. Dan's time distortion devices had evolved to the point where he could fire weapons that hit targets in the past, present, and future simultaneously. "Carol," Dan said quietly, "I sometimes wonder what we have become." Carol looked at the alien commanders signing the surrender documents. "We became what we needed to become, Dan. They wanted to exterminate us. We chose to educate them instead. By terrifying them into submission. By showing them that humans are not a species you want to threaten. Education can take many forms." Major Sam Parker and his special operations team had been responsible for some of the most effective psychological warfare in galactic history. His soldiers had become legendary among Zaperian forces as warriors who could not be killed and who laughed at death itself. "Sir," Sergeant Kate Williams asked, "what happens to us now that the war is over?" Sam considered the question. His team had spent 18 months perfecting the art of close-quarters combat in zero gravity. They had become so effective that most enemy forces surrendered rather than face them in battle. "We become peacekeepers, Kate. The galaxy has learned that humans are dangerous when threatened. Now we need to show them that we can be reasonable when we are not." Communications specialist Ben Clark had spent the war broadcasting human culture throughout Zaperian space. His psychological warfare campaign had convinced the aliens that humans were a species of warriors who had been preparing for galactic conquest for centuries. "Ben," analyst Amy Foster said as they watched the ceremony, "the aliens still think our movies are documentary footage." Ben smiled. "Maybe we should let them keep thinking that. If they believe every human is a trained warrior, they are less likely to start another war. Is that ethical? Amy, we just convinced an entire empire to surrender without destroying a single planet. I think our methods were more ethical than theirs." The surrender ceremony concluded with Grand Admiral Kixathera making a formal statement that would be broadcast throughout the galaxy. His words would influence interstellar politics for generations to come. "The Zaperian Empire formally surrenders to human forces," he announced. "We acknowledge that we underestimated the capacity of the human species for warfare. We advise all galactic civilizations to approach humanity with respect and caution." He paused, looking directly at the camera. "Humans appear to be a peaceful species when left alone. But when threatened, they become something that defies explanation. They do not simply fight to win. They fight to ensure that their enemies never threaten them again." The broadcast continued with Kixathera's personal observations about human warfare. "In our 3,000 years of expansion, we have conquered 12 different species. All of them fought predictably. They used conventional tactics, standard weapons, and logical strategies. Humans do none of these things. They treat warfare as a creative exercise. They develop new weapons during battles. They use their industrial capacity to build ships that should not be possible. Most disturbing of all, they seem to enjoy the process. Admiral Jake Sullivan accepted the formal surrender documents and sealed them in a container that would be sent to Earth. The war was officially over, but its effects would last for centuries. "Admiral," Captain Lisa Morgan said privately, "the other galactic powers are requesting meetings with us." Jake nodded. He had expected this. The war had demonstrated human capabilities to species throughout the galaxy. Some would want to become allies. Others would want to make sure they never became enemies. "Set up the meetings," Jake ordered. "But make sure they understand our position. We do not want to conquer anyone. We just want to be left alone." "And if they do not leave us alone?" Jake looked out at the stars, thinking about the weapons humanity had developed in just 18 months of warfare. Carol's gravity manipulators could crush planets. Dan's time weapons could erase fleets from existence. Alex's biological weapons could make entire star systems uninhabitable. Then they will learn the same lesson the Zaperians learned. Jake said quietly, "Humans are a peaceful species, but we are very, very good at war." The galaxy had learned a new rule. Humans were not to be threatened. They were individually fragile, but collectively unstoppable. Most importantly, they seemed to become more dangerous the more pressure was applied to them. The Zaperian Empire had made the mistake of trying to exterminate humanity. In response, humans had systematically dismantled their 3,000-year-old empire in 18 months. They had done it with weapons that violated the laws of physics, tactics that defied military logic, and soldiers who laughed at death. The war crimes tribunals would spend years trying to classify what humans had done during the conflict. The final ruling was classified, but it reportedly stated that humanity had fought the war using creative applications of physics and psychological warfare beyond established parameters. More importantly, the tribunals recommended that future conflicts with humanity be avoided through diplomatic means. The galaxy had learned that sleeping humans should be left alone. When awakened to violence, they became something that challenged the very concept of civilized warfare. Peace had returned to the galaxy, but it was a peace built on the understanding that humanity was not a species to be trifled with. They had proven that sometimes the best defense was an overwhelmingly creative offense, applied with enthusiasm and improved through experience.